guys, welcome to Politically Provoked, an interactive podcast where we host debates. Hey guys, welcome to Politically Provoked. This is your first time joining us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the notification bell to keep up to date with all our future debates and panels. So I am your host, Brittany. I'm here with my co-host, Todd. How are you?
Doing great, Britt. How are you tonight?
And I guess our other host tonight, because you're not moderating anything, Justin. How are you?
I am doing great, thank you.
All right. So tonight we are going to be interviewing the author Luke Ford. This was requested by Duvid, and he actually wrote me a little bit of intro to him. So I'm going to just read what Duvid said before we bring him on. So Luke is probably best known as a reporter on the pornography business, but sold his blog over a decade ago to focus on other areas, including white nationalists, having interviewed some of the biggest names in both pornography and white nationalism. He's an author of 4 books and interviewed thousands of personalities online. He wrote more, but I'm going to let him do some of the talking now. So let's bring on our guest. Luke, how are you? Oop, you're muted. Where'd go?
Where'd it go?
Ah!
I don't know. Sometimes the mic
back.
just cuts out at unexpected moments, but just adds to the excitement.
Yeah. So if you want to introduce yourself and tell people where you lie on the political spectrum and maybe where people can find you.
So Luke Ford, Twitter, /Luke Ford, YouTube.
Is he quiet for you guys?
Yes.
A little bit.
Yeah. We probably should have checked the mic setting better before.
Doggone it. Don't know what's
There
happening
it
there.
is.
So, I'm on Twitter. I got a couple of YouTube channels. Luke is back and Luke Ford live streams. And I've been blogging since 1997. So I'm on lukeford.net. So I don't think there are many people who've been blogging on an ongoing basis longer than I have. So 24 years. So keep me in your thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, we get a lot of, I've heard your name quite a bit. I am not familiar with a lot of people online, to be honest. So Duvid has kind of helped me out a little bit with this. He said that you were on the Worski show, and then after that you live streamed pretty much every day except for like the Jewish holidays. You're an Orthodox Jew, right?
Yes, I am. I'm a convert to Orthodox Judaism.
So you converted, okay. And so what are your streams normally about?
Anything that interests me, because it takes a lot of energy to do a live stream, as you know. So usually it'll be a book that I'm reading or something that provokes me. So, for example, a lot of people I know say, "Oh, COVID's a hoax." So I think that's absolutely
Wait, careful
ridiculous.
with that. On the COVID stuff, because YouTube is hardcore.
Well, a lot of people hold, I think, ridiculous minimalist views on COVID, and so that gets me going. When you have about 1,500 Americans dying each day of COVID, I don't know how you can downplay the severity of COVID. Obviously, it's something that's of vital importance, so that'll provoke me. Or when people go off against vaccines, I think that's completely ridiculous. I mean, vaccines have provided so much benefit that will provoke me. Or mainly I follow right-wing politics, and so if there's something in right-wing politics that stimulates me. So, for example, the right wing has not been able to produce a quality newspaper, anything like the New York Times. So the New York Times is a great newspaper. It's a left-wing newspaper, but there are great stories in it every day. And so when I hear people trashing the New York Times because it's politically slanted, well, everything has a political slant. There's just nothing on the right that's equivalently as superb journalism as the New York Times. So if people want to say, oh, Fox News, well, Fox News is tabloid. I mean, that's fine. Like it's aimed at a 95 IQ level. And if you want to go that route, it's
Oh, there he's gone again.
Lost your mic. Oh,
you're gone.
Yeah, I think I'm back.
It's like a loose wire.
Yeah, keeping it exciting. So yeah, when I get provoked by, I think, cheap and easy shots at, say, the left or mainstream journalism, then I get, I want to take this topic on, because I like to read the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post every day, the Wall Street Journal, and read academic research, and then mainly follow right-wing dissident thought. But when I get something that's when people get into their echo chamber, when so that they're not listening to other points of view or not listening to changes and challenges to their comfortable ways of thinking, that's when I get provoked and go, okay, I want to talk about this.
So do you debate people a lot online, or you interview them more?
Both. So it depends. So I've had vast periods of my life where I was mainly interviewing people, and then if the opportunities come up for debate, then I enjoy debate as well. My father did a PhD in rhetoric, so I guess debate was something that I grew up with around the breakfast table, the lunch table, and the dinner table.
Okay. And are your views like more right wing?
Yeah, my tendencies are right wing. So I think most of us, our politics are biologically based. And so I think people are born certain tendencies either towards like an egalitarian, generally left wing perspective or towards a more hierarchical and traditional perspective. And so I think that I was probably biologically predisposed to a high disgust reflex, to fear of the unknown and fear of the stranger. And so this predisposes one towards what would generally be considered right wing politics. So I'm comfortable with hierarchy. I believe that generally speaking, traditional ways of doing things are probably going to be better than new, untested ways of doing things. So someone on the left is going to have much more openness to new ways of organizing people, new ways of doing things. And my tendencies are for the traditional and the time tested.
Somebody mentioned, and I've heard a few people mention this actually, that you would have a lot of the JQ debates on your channel. Is that with more of like the white nationalists, or were you debating them, or were you having other people debating them?
Well, it would depend. So I'm looking for something interesting to talk about. So I found a niche for about 10 years blogging about the pornography industry because no one else really was doing it. It was a wide open niche where I could get a fairly good audience and I can make it an independent living as a writer. And then when you had the rise of the alt-right starting around 2014, I became interested in that because generally speaking, the only coverage of the alt-right was by the mainstream media with a kind of very distant perspective, and they wouldn't even literally quote things that people were saying, but they would say, "Oh, he said a slur against homosexuals," and so it completely lacked the visceral element. So I'm looking for compelling content, and so for a while I read a book about Hollywood movie producers. I focused mainly on Hollywood. Other times I focused on Jewish journalism. Other times I've focused on the pornography industry. It's just where I feel like I can make a contribution. So I have a background in journalism, but when I started blogging about the pornography industry, I found the most compelling content came from just allowing people to speak directly, just quote them directly about their own subjective experience. That was incredibly compelling. It was fun.
Lost you again.
Uh-oh. Yeah, you're right. I think I'm back. So I found when I was blogging on the pornography industry that when I just quoted people about their own first person subjective experience, that material was far more compelling than what I could construct with a traditional journalistic narrative. So I'm looking for something that captures my attention. I get bored fairly easily. And so I guess I like excitement.
Now you're muted.
Yeah, Brett.
I can't hear anyone.
Fucking A. We're all on fire tonight with this. Holy fuck. Yeah, no, a lot of times, like when we're doing our interviews, it's more to, for debates, we get their positions on issues and we use them to match them up with other debaters that are a little more known, and we'll do them live because our interviews aren't normally live, but and we'll allow chat to ask questions as well. But one of the questions that we do ask is during the lightning round, which I'm probably going to ask some of these questions to you anyways, but is if you would be in favor of banning porn.
I I would be opposed to it. I wouldn't support it either. So I think there is no alternative but to set some limits on pornography. So where exactly you set the limits Like, do you set the limits with water sports? Do you set the limits with simulated rape or incest? Or like, do you set the limit with hardcore penetration? Every society is going to have to set a limit somewhere. So there will always be some banning of pornography. And where exactly you set that limit, I don't have a strong opinion. I do think that for most people who use it, it has a negative effect on them.
So you want like government regulations in porn?
There will always be government regulations. So I'm not primarily a polemicist. I'm not primarily someone who argues. I do that at times, but my primary interest is in understanding the world. So there's no government that doesn't have some regulation on pornography. There will always be regulation on pornography. Where exactly you draw the line on that regulation, then that's where I think the thoughtful discussions can come in. So it would not, I would not lose sleep if hardcore pornography was banned. On the other hand, I have no strong feeling that that would definitely make the country a better place.
Um, if there was like one public figure that you could think of that's the closest to your views, who would that be?
Steve Saylor.
Who's that?
He's a blogger. He was a weekly columnist for UPI. He writes a weekly column for Takis Mag. So he's
What got you started in all this?
what is all this?
Blogging and streaming.
Well, I think it probably went back to second grade. I remember our class in Australia, we were taken on a walk in the outback, and we were sitting on a bridge, and we were told to write about the creek that was flowing below us. And I just jotted down some thoughts. And when the teacher read what I'd written out loud, it was amazing to me how so many people responded. It was like, whoa, I have an ability with words that can affect and can touch people. So pretty much from that day on, I didn't have any doubt about my ability with writing. And so I wanted to be a writer, and then just the medium through which I would use, would it be newspapers or books or magazines or my own blog, that would just vary with circumstance. But from second grade on, I realized I had a gift with writing.
So you, David said that you have written 4 books. What are those ones about?
So my first book was called A History of X, 100 Years of Sex in Film.
Nope, we lost you again.
Oh, yep. No, I'm here. So it's not on my end. So I'm here. So I read A History of X in 100 Years of Sex in Film, which came out from Prometheus Books in 1999. Then my next book was on Hollywood movie producers, called The Producers: Profiles in Frustration. So I interviewed about 100 Hollywood movie and TV producers. And again, I was looking for a niche that was underserved. No one's written a book about producers. People like to write about movie screenwriters and TV writers and actors and directors, but nobody talks about producers. So I thought, there's a niche. Let me jump on that niche. And then next book was on American Jewish journalism. So I did a book called Yesterday's News Tomorrow, Inside American Jewish Journalism. That also came out in 2004. So I interviewed editors and writers for the major sectarian Jewish press. So publications such as the Forward, based out of New York, or the New York Jewish Week, or the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles, all the major Jewish publications. I interviewed people from there. And then, what was my next book? Oh, I think the last book was like 15 years ago. So, Profiles in Sex, Love, and Death. It was just a series of essays, mainly based on people I'd known in the sex industry.
Okay.
Oh, and I did a memoir, Excommunicated, A Rebel Without a Shul. There, 5.
Okay. What do you think the number one threat facing America is?
Well, Americans don't have very much in common with each other. I'm from Australia, so the cohesion that Australians have far surpasses that. Get off the plane as you enter America, and you're essentially treated as the enemy by the government, by customs. And so America is so diverse, which there are benefits, but there's also a tremendous toll to be paid in terms of social cohesion and social trust. So I'd say a lack of social cohesion and a lack of social trust and an ever increasing fragmentation and a lack of sense of much in common with your fellow citizens is probably the number one challenge that Americans have.
Okay. Um, Let me see here. Um, Also, for those of you guys watching, if you have questions for Luke, just tag politically provoked, and we'll pull those up as well. Um, Justin, you want to jump into some questions?
Sure. So, you do get into some of the JQ debates you were saying. What's like your big, how do you convince people that like JQ isn't a thing?
Well, I did try to convince people that JQ isn't a thing. I welcome the debate. I welcome the discussion. And it's not that I'm not the guy in any debate, the guy with all the answers. I'm learning from people that I'm debating. So for me, debating is not primarily a blood sport. It's not about, wiping out the other person. I listen to what other people have to say. And so people who challenge me on the Jewish question, I learn from them at times. So I think it is an advantage for every individual and every group to take into consideration how their choices, their words, and their behavior affects others. So I welcome a debate on the Jewish question, just like I'd welcome a debate on the Presbyterian question or the Japanese question or any group, because every group has an effect on outsiders, and the choices that you make as a group and as an individual in the words you use and in the actions you take spill out over other people. So you can do things as an individual and as a group that make you absolutely hated. You can do things that make you and your group just stink in the eyes of other people. And I think it's important for members of particularly insular groups to have an awareness of how their words and deeds and their customs and their beliefs affect other people. So I welcome it. I think that the blacks would benefit, homosexuals would benefit, Christians would benefit, Muslims benefit, Jews benefit from scrutiny and accurate criticism. Accurate criticism makes me better. Accurate criticism makes Justin and Brittany and Todd better. Accurate criticism makes everyone better. Accurate criticism makes Jews better. It makes Muslims better. It makes Christians better. It makes every group is improved by accurate criticism. And we do not benefit ourselves by saying, these certain groups, they cannot be criticized. And so the conventional wisdom right now is that blacks and Jews and gays and trans and some other oppressed groups, that they should never be publicly criticized because of how much they've suffered. That does not do those groups any favors, and it doesn't do the wider society any favors. So different groups and different individuals tend to have different gifts. And I think we should be open and welcome a discussion. And when the discussion is unnecessarily nasty or inaccurate, then that should be called out. But simply noticing things should not be a crime. And all of us have huge blank spots. All of us have huge blind spots. I have tremendous blind spots. And there's nothing like getting smacked in the face, with something that you didn't realize, particularly while you're engaged in a debate online. And it's like, whoa, I need to reconsider something about how I'm speaking and how I'm acting or how my group is coming across to other people. I'm improved by that. And the wider society is improved by that sort of discussion.
Sure. And so do you find any credence in their criticisms?
Of course, every group is worthy of criticism. So there can be some outside criticisms of certain groups of Jews that they're too insular. And for example, there are some very religious groups, some very religious Jews who don't tend to say hello to non-Jews. I mean, they are that insulated that they don't even say good morning, good afternoon to non-Jews. I think that's really bad, right? So I welcome that criticism, and I agree with that criticism. Then one thing I noticed about the pornography industry, the outstanding characteristic I noticed about the pornography industry was that virtually everybody in it had limited ties to other people. And so whether it was Jews in it or people from Roman Catholic backgrounds or Christian backgrounds, they all tended to have, relatively few ties to family and to community. So people without ties, it enables them to explore, more risky and edgy things, but it also allows them to, go over the edge and become socially destructive. So if someone wants to point out Jews or Christians or any group who's lacking ties, lacking connection to the United States of America, for example, trying to cheat the system in various ways. So there are some members of every group, sometimes disproportionate numbers of a group who try to cheat the wider society. I think we're all improved by an accurate discussion of, say, certain groups having predilections to cheating in certain areas.
Cool.
I
And
don't
so,
know.
you,
I'm
oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
So you had answered how you feel about the porn industry. What about the broader sex work? How do you feel about those things like prostitution specifically?
Well, it all depends upon your perspective. So, a stiff penis has no conscience. So I'm not immune to the lure of the pursuit of sexual gratification. I dated some porn stars to use a euphemism. So I understand the appeal, and I particularly understand the appeal as someone who's lacked normal levels of human connection for much of his life. And so I have struggled at times with sex addiction, with love addiction, with fantasy addiction, with porn addiction. So I understand how we are wired to connect. And if you don't learn to connect normally, then you're going to find some other way to connect, some abnormal and destructive way. So I can't imagine that any parent is proud of their son or daughter who becomes a hooker, right? Most fathers are not proud of their daughters who become hookers. Most mothers would not be, proud of their son who becomes a gigolo. So I would think, generally speaking, that the commercial sex industry has a negative effect on most people who participate in it, either as a customer or as a provider.
David said Luke Ford is most famous for figuring out who patient zero was in a porn scandal and spreading AIDS. You want to go into that?
Sure. So I started researching the pornography industry in the fall of 1995, and there were a couple of HIV cases in the heterosexual porn industry at the time, which were getting some attention because starting in the 1980s, people thought that AIDS would just sweep through and essentially take down the heterosexual porn industry, and that never happened. That year after year, there were virtually no cases, and then suddenly around 1995, we had a couple of cases, and then 1996, we had another case, and then early 1997, we had two cases, and then later in 1997, another couple of cases. And so I was talking to people trying to figure out what was going on, and there was one guy who was the most likely patient zero, Mark Wallace Goldberg, who was a veteran male porn performer in the heterosexual porn industry. He'd also worked in the homosexual porn industry. And it seemed like a few months after he'd done unprotected backdoor intercourse with various women in the industry, up to about a dozen, they tested HIV positive. So when I broke that news, he was the only major member of the industry who had not been properly tested. And it appeared that he'd been using faked tests to continue to perform in the industry. So that stopped his career right there and limited the damage.
Were there any consequences for that?
He was not criminally prosecuted. I'm sure there was probably a civil lawsuit. I'm not sure how that played out. But there weren't any obvious consequences. So there was a documentary on Showtime about it called Porndemic. Now, the consequences to the industry was that they became more rigorous with their HIV testing, and so that reduced the wild and reckless transmission of sexually transmitted diseases in the industry as a whole.
Todd, do you wanna?
Yeah, I'll jump in. How you doing tonight? I got a chance to watch one of your most recent video yesterday, so I have some questions based off that. But I got one that I just came up with on the fly. You said you're a fan of the New York Times and the Washington Post. I think they should give back their Pulitzer for Russia collusion. Do you agree with that? What is your take on that? And old Maggie Haberman and all the crew at the New York Times and the Washington Post, due to the new
Yes.
developments that we've had.
Well, I don't care that much about the Pulitzer, but I accept your point. I think that's an accurate point. It's kind of amazing that for about 3 years, the number one news story in this nation, pushed by our most respected news outlets, was a story that had very little significance. That there's no evidence, and it was always clear that Russia did not hack our elections. That any effect on our elections by Russian agitators taking out Facebook ads was incredibly minimal. And so for 3 years we were distracted by a nonsense story. So it just shows that there's no necessary connection between what's on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post and what is true and important. So I like and respect the New York Times and the Washington Post because I feel like I know how to read them. And I feel like when I dig through them that I can find useful articles. But whenever I try to read on the Russian hoax, because it was the number one story for 3 years, and I was doing pretty much a daily show about news stories such as the Russia collusion narrative, I'd try to read these stories and I'd always get a headache because they were just so reaching. They were just obviously reaching for anything to try to damage Donald Trump. And I think there are many legitimate criticisms of Donald Trump, but the Democrats and the mainstream media seized on Russian collusion as the number one story in the nation, and it turned out to have very little importance. So even though I like the New York Times and the Washington Post, that doesn't mean that the number one story that they may run with for years ends up having very little importance. So I can like the New York Times and not allow it to set the agenda for me, what is important, true, and good.
Fair enough. Thank you. So we have some room temperature Wignats in the crowd. So maybe you can explain what the Quad is and what future developments, since you're an Aussie, I think it's relative, what future developments you see coming from the Quad. Obviously, we saw a ramp up with Taiwan lately, and we see that China has some mock-ups of our carriers and destroyers that they're going to obviously do missile tests on, probably the Dongfeng, the DF-41. So what do you see going forward from the Quad? Are you a fan of the Quad? What do you see going forward with that?
Oh, sure. I'm an American citizen, so the number one threat to the power of the United States is the rise of China. So the Quad refers to a strategic alliance between India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, and their primary interest right now is limiting the rise of China. So there have been deals made with the Quad that will give Australia its first nuclear-powered submarines. But this just shows a broader point that there are no permanent friends or allies in life, that there are only shifting alliances. And so someone who's your enemy one day may well be an important strategic ally the next day. I think I got my Mark Wallace story, for example, by someone with whom I was just on the verge of going to war with. And he said, "Do you want to be friends?" And I said, yes. That was just my instinctive response. We were just about to go to war on each other. And he blindsided me with, "Do you want to be friends?" And then he points out, the answer to this Mark Wallace story. And so, yeah, we don't have any, as far as nation states, we don't have any permanent allies. We just have shifting alliances. And right now, Japan, Australia, the United States, and India all have a shared interest in limiting the rise of China. So someone who's from Australia has all his friends and many of his friends and family in Australia, and someone who's lived in the United States for 80% of my life. I want America to remain the number one power in the world, and so I'm all down with the Quad.
All right. And then, as I said, I really only got to watch your last video, and it was on the power of structure of a situation, the shape behavior. What do you see the behaviors that are going to be coming from the 2022 midterms, especially after Democrats kind of took one on the chin, with Virginia, they did get New Jersey, but, and you can get into objectives, budgeting, strategy, since it was a topic you went over yesterday. What do you see coming in 2022?
Well, I'll set it up by noting the power of situation as opposed to moral character. There's often a lot of conversation about moral character, but I don't think moral character refers to anything real because who we are depends on the situation. I don't speak the way I'm speaking right now when I'm with my friends in synagogue. I don't speak the way I'm speaking right now even when I'm doing my own live stream because it's a different situation. So I'm just meeting you. We're having some sound and technical issues. I get thrown off my rhythm. You get thrown off your rhythm. I'm this like new, weird, maybe interesting, maybe repellent, personality. So it's all, a little bit awkward. So we're all in this awkward situation, and that is affecting the quality of what we're saying to each other. So there, there isn't like one Luke. There's not like one authentic Luke. Who I am talking to you is very different from who I am when I'm talking to one Alexander Technique client that I have, or when I'm talking to one friend. When I'm talking to one friend, I'm talking completely differently than when I'm on a first date. And so who I am when I'm in a 12-step meeting is different from how I am in synagogue, which is different from how I am at the beach, which is different from how I am on my own live stream, or different from how I am on someone else's live stream. So this is the power of situation, which I think is far more important than the power of moral character, because we don't have a moral character given that who we are differs with every situation. Now, the situation heading into 2022 is that as each month goes by, as each year goes by, Americans have less in common with each other. We have reduced social trust and we have reduced social cohesion. And the people who differ from us politically increasingly become less and less human to us. So the most normal thing when you have a very strong in-group identity, whether it's Jewish or Christian or Muslim or atheist or gay, if you have a strong in-group identity, the stronger your in-group identity, the less human out-groups become to you. And so for Americans, we increasingly don't see people who differ from us as fully human. In fact, we're probably much more likely to see them as satanic. So I expect that, more and more of the right wing will be seeing people on the left as essentially demonic, and people on the left will see people on the right as moronic or their own. I'm not sure what's the left-wing secular equivalent of demonic, but they certainly have it. So we're having a nation that's increasingly fraying and increasingly feels very little in common with each other and is increasingly hostile towards the other party. And so I don't see any way that this temperature significantly goes down. And I'm just not aware of any way that our social cohesion and social trust can stop falling. It just seems to be getting worse every month.
Okay, and then that segues right into moral structure. What do you think the moral structure of America is going forward? You brought up that you were Orthodox and that they had conservative values as like not sleeping with someone until marriage. Do you think Christians should embrace this position going forward? And do you think it would solve the OnlyFans problem and divorce and abortion in America?
I love to watch movies and TV. I'll answer you with a story. And I notice whenever I watch a movie or whenever I watch a TV show, the characters who get into trouble indulging themselves never have anything transcendent to live for. So the characters in movies and TVs shows and novels who get into trouble, say with drugs or pursuing sex or pornography or pursuing fame, attention, pursuing food, just pursuing their basic desires, that if they don't have anything transcendent above themselves to live for, they get into trouble. And it just seems to me, this is just what I'm thinking about when I'm watching movies and TV shows or reading novels, like this guy wouldn't be getting into this trouble, of just spending all his spare moment fantasizing about diddling his parishioner. He's the pastor. He's got an attractive parishioner. He can't wait to diddle her, but he's a married pastor. He shouldn't be doing this. He wouldn't be in trouble if he really genuinely took his transcendent calling as a Christian or as a pastor seriously. But all sorts of people who ostensibly believe in God, they completely leave that behind, for example, when they get sexually obsessed or obsessed with fame or money. So I think for most of us, particularly those with tendencies towards addiction, are much better off having some sort of transcendent moral code. And whether that's a Christian one or a Muslim one or even a Buddhist one or a secular humanist one, but as long as it's a code that transcends them, as long as people have something to live for that's greater than the satisfaction of their own needs for fame, for attention, for money, for sex, for power, that I think most people do better with some sort of transcendent code to live for. And I know that my own chat has behaved much better when I instituted a code for what goes on in the chat. I mean, it was amazing. When I started this about 2 years ago, I didn't think anyone would take it seriously. I just thought everybody would laugh at it and everybody would ignore it. And I was stunned when the bad behavior in my chat went down to about 20% of what it was prior to the code. It just overnight, I put on a code for how I want people to conduct themselves in the chat. and I referenced it. And overnight, the bad behavior, reduced to about 1/5. Like, how does that happen in just 1 or 2 days? It was amazing. I didn't think anyone would pay the slightest, bit of attention or respect to my, speech code for my YouTube channel. Had an amazing effect. So yeah, I think having some sort of, transcendent moral code that you hold yourself accountable to tends to morally elevate people. And then for a nation, you asked me about the nation. Nations need a code too. Nations need an ethos. Nations need a story. Like, every nation should feel like it's the very center of the universe, that it's the greatest nation, whether it's Japan or China or Australia or the United States or France or Canada. Every nation should find a way of looking at the world where it's totally awesome. But with that narrative should go some sort of ethos about what it means to be American or French or Japanese. And with that bonding, whenever you bond with a group of people, what always comes out of it is, one, a sense of energy, right? So if you're lacking in energy, there's something wrong with your ability to bond with others. So you always get energy from bonding with other people, and you always get a moral code. There is no, joint connection that you can have with other people that does not produce a code. Even having sex, you have sex with someone on a repeated basis, there will come a moral code out of that. Generally speaking, it will be expected to be monogamous. But even if you just have an awesome basketball game with your friends every Friday night, there will be an ethos and a moral code that comes out of that. So when you connect to other people, there will always be an increased sense of energy, and there will always be an increased sense of and clarity about a moral code that comes out of it. And the problem with Americans' decreased sense of cohesion and connection and trust with each other is that there's a widening and deepening sense of malaise in the country, the lack of energy, and there is a diminishing of any sense of communal ethos or moral code.
So from Neo-Israel, I don't know how they say that, but they wanted in because you mentioned 12-step and asking if you struggled with addiction.
Oh yeah, like basically every emotional addiction I've struggled with. Obviously, I'm have an addiction to attention. I've struggled with pornography addiction at various times in my life. I've just struggled with the intoxicating power of falling in love. I have never been able to sustain a romantic relationship over a year, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely have troubles with that. I've eaten too much at times. I've developed like a food addiction. Basically every emotional addiction, I think I've had it to varying degrees. So I've been a pretty active participant in 5 different 12-step programs. I've never dabbled in drugs or alcohol, however.
From Smaggles Brother says, what are his thoughts on the draconian lockdowns Australia has in effect?
Well, I'm not an expert on what social policy we should have in reaction to a pandemic, but judging by the results, Australia's done real well. Australia's got about 1/50th of the COVID death rate of the United States. So maybe the social distancing may be a little strict here or there, but overall, it does seem like Australia's been incredibly effective. And this notion that Australia is some kind of police state is absurd. It's the nonsense that comes from the populist right wing. So over the past decade, it seems like the left wing has become increasingly intellectual in its rhetoric anyway, and the right wing has become increasingly lowbrow and proletariat. And so this notion that Australia or any community or country that imposes social distancing in reaction to a pandemic is a police state is absurd. So social distancing is a policy that communities have used in reaction to pandemics for thousands and thousands of years. Social distancing is not part of some great reset instituted by global elites in 2020. The Torah has mechanisms for social distancing. Social distancing was used for the Black Plague in Europe. Social distancing has been a time-tested method for dealing with a plague. And masks, similarly, have been around for well over 100 years. They seem to be a fairly commonsensical reaction to an influenza virus. Now, wearing a mask outside, okay, you can make some pretty strong points about it, and you can say, oh, look, the studies say this or that about masks. But it seems to me fairly commonsensical that when you've got a lot of people in close, particularly indoor spaces, that it would seem in a pandemic, in an influenza pandemic in particular, that you should wear a mask. So yeah, it seems to me that Australia has done has dealt with COVID fairly effectively.
And then Oswald Spangler says, would Luke rather live in present day Australia or Israel?
I would rather live in California, right? Exactly where I
Mhm.
live. But I think I'd be happy living in Australia, or I'd be happy living in Israel or England, any place that speaks English. I think, and there are a lot of English speakers in Israel. I think I'd be quite happy.
Have you traveled a lot outside of the US?
Yeah, I grew up in Australia. Then I lived in England for a couple of years, where my dad was getting his second PhD. Then we traveled through Europe for a few months. I've also been back to Europe since. So yeah, I'm moderately well traveled, and I go back to Australia every few years.
How long have you lived in the States?
Since 1977, so about 90% of my time since 1977, I've lived in California.
Okay, let me see what else we have here. Questions. Some from David. Basically, Luke realized he was getting up there in age and became less edgy, and Norvin took over Luke's former edgy audience. What? I don't know what he means by that.
Well, again, as you get older, you probably do become a little more careful in the things you say. You have increased awareness of the effects of your words and behavior have on other people, and also as you make more money and as you build a better quality life for yourself, you become much more reluctant to throw things away. So when you don't have anything to lose, I think people tend to behave much more recklessly. When people build up, as I've increasingly built up a life that I love over the past 5 years, then yeah, I become increasingly careful about throwing it all away.
And so yeah, I think he also mentioned that you guys were the ones who basically started Norvin. What are your thoughts on Norvin?
I think
He's
he's a
in the
very
back.
compelling. I think Norvin's a very compelling personality, and he's very polite. He's got excellent manners. I've only had good experiences with Norvin. I mean, uh, I completely disagree with him on all sorts of hot button issues such as the JQ and various forms of national socialism and the like. But I've only had positive interactions with Norvin, even when we were passionately disagreeing about things. I could not ask for a better panelist on a show. He would be considerate of other people, and he has such an amazing and compelling personal story as well. The thing. No, the road that Norvin has walked is not one that I would have liked to have walked. I mean, the challenges that Norvin has faced are not challenges that I would feel strong enough to face with the energy that he has. So I've really enjoyed Norvin while completely disagreeing with him.
Zen Shapiro wants to know how much you bench because gotta have the good questions.
Well, this is weird, and this is probably not going to make any sense to you, but I had ill health almost all my life, and I don't have any medical or scientific basis for saying this or any qualifications, but I was raised a vegetarian, and I've been a vegetarian my whole life, and I'm a self-hating vegetarian. I think it's incredibly, incredibly unhealthy, but it's very difficult to shift from the way that you were brought up to eat. So the food that I was brought up to eat in my first 20 years, can't help but continue eating that the last 35 years. And then about 3 months ago, I've been thinking for years, how can I eat meat without like vomiting? Like, how can I ingest some meat? Because I became increasingly intellectually convinced that meat eating is a far healthier way to go. So I just started taking these beef organ capsules. I swallow these capsules of like all these different beef organs, and I swear I have not felt better in my entire life. So it's amazing. Prior to a couple of months ago, I couldn't work out rigorously without getting sick, and now I've just started back up on the push-ups. Not a huge amount, but there's maybe 7 sets of 30 push-ups. I've just started doing about 15 miles every other day on my stationary bike. I've just started being able to work out with a little bit of rigor in the past 2 months. So I'm excited to find out how much I can bench.
Okay. Liponius Maximus says, ask him what he thinks of the NJP and Chairman Enoch. What is this? Is this a meme?
That's the National Justice Party and
No.
Mike Enoch. So Mike Enoch and Eric Stryker are incredibly compelling and frequently funny far right activists, and I've always enjoyed talking to them and completely disagree with them on many things, but they're compelling personalities. And again, you have to put everyone in their genre. So if you put like Norvin or Mike Enoch in the genre of, socially responsible political analysts, obviously they're not going to work in that genre. But if you put them in the genre of provocateur or shock jock, then you can appreciate people for what they are. Like if you just put me in the right genre and it's hard for me to see myself, then you can appreciate me for, whatever it is that the genre I am. And if I can put you in your correct genre, then I can appreciate you for you. And I don't have to think less about you because you're not a Buddhist monk, or you're not some billionaire, or you're not someone who's, just amazing playing the violin. So everybody's got a genre, and I just try to fit people into their genre and try to understand, in what ways can I appreciate someone.
What were some of your favorite guests you've had on your program?
Oh, this guy Ricardo, we hosted a show together for a couple of months, and he was great because I come from an Anglo-Saxon Seventh-day Adventist upbringing, so I tend to be very removed from my emotions, and Ricardo is just like the opposite. He's just always exploding, and so he would bring a visceral quality to our show that no one else has been able to approach. And so I just really enjoyed doing shows with Ricardo, because he would, I feel like such a faker, and I feel like someone who's just so emotionally constipated, and I feel like such a liar in terms of, emotional honesty compared to my friend Ricardo. And so having his visceral, explosive personality on the show was just a great. It was just great for me. I just really enjoyed it. So I've enjoyed a lot of people on the show, like Duvid. I never have any idea what Duvid's going to say. Like Duvid will just frequently say things that make absolute no sense to me. But then I'll think, oh wait, maybe if I look at it in this perspective, I see what he's saying. Norvin was an amazing personality. Mike Enoch, Eric Stryker, Richard Spencer, like a lot of these people on the right. But I mean, Kevin Michael Grace was such a learned man that I hosted a show with for almost 2 years. Just imagine what it's like doing a show day in and day out with someone who's substantially smarter than you are. When you think of yourself as quite smart. So I think of myself as quite smart. And then I got to do a daily show for almost 2 years with someone substantially smarter than I was. That was humbling on a daily basis.
So when you had Eric Stryker and Enoch on, what did that consist of? Were they debating people? What was the topic that you guys were all discussing?
Well, those guys are just fun to talk to. Like, it doesn't even matter the topic. I mean, I'm sure Enoch and Stryker could say something interesting about the Pittsburgh Steelers or transcendental meditation. These guys are just talkers and thinkers, and they just have an avid desire for knowledge and for real talk. And so the topic wasn't important. It was just their explosive personalities. Now, again, I would not want them running the country. Yeah, I would not want them checking the engines before the plane took off. I would not want them in any position of responsibility. But as shock jocks, they're just tremendous personalities, incredibly compelling. Now, that doesn't mean that I would want to have them on the show every day. It doesn't mean that I don't tune into them very often. But in little doses, they're just, wonderfully entertaining. So I guess I'm sure we talked about the Jews, but we also talked about religion and race and politics, and I think we talked about meditation and moral character. Any topic, these guys will say something provocative and interesting on. Now, I would not want to base social policy on what they say, but just for sheer, can't look away, compelling shock jocks. I mean, these guys have it.
do you still have, are these streams still up on your channel? Where you had,
No, they're definitely not up on YouTube, but I have not taken down any of my streams. They're on SoundCloud, so you can find
SoundCloud?
the MP3s from my SoundCloud. Everything I've ever done is on my SoundCloud, and also Google Podcasts and iTunes and
Yeah,
Spotify.
if you want to, after you're done, if you want to send me all your links, I can add it to the description for people as well.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, and so people can check it out. I definitely want to check it out. Yeah, I've heard like a lot of people say, sometimes in some of the debates that we've had, it feels like old school Luke Ford show. So yeah, I'd definitely be interested to see some of the stuff that you were doing. Somebody mentioned in chat that, with YouTube's strict TOS, it kind of put a damper on some of the things that you were doing. Does that have something to do with it? Or
Oh
does
yeah,
it seem like,
it just crushed, it just absolutely crushed the show, and also the social consequences. So prior to Hailgate in late 2016 and prior to Charlottesville, there was just more room for this kind of edgy right wing talk because it just seemed like the alt right were a bunch of merry pranksters. Then after Hailgate, it seemed like the alt right were just another bunch of Nazis. And so
is Hailgate the Richard Spencer thing?
yes,
Okay.
that's when Richard Spencer did, hail
Yeah.
victory, hail out people, hail Donald Trump, which I didn't even realize at the time, but that was just the English language version of Sieg Heil. So I didn't even realize that Sieg Heil meant hail. So once the alt right embraced, National Socialism, then it became a little more difficult to laugh about it and to joke about it and to, do a non-judgmental daily show about it. And then after the disaster at Charlottesville and just the incredible social dysfunction as the whole movement just fell apart with the feuding and the doxing, and it just became such a, walking, talking disaster. And then the mass shootings, whether in Christchurch or in Texas, the Walmart in Texas, when those things happen, that has an effect on me. I can't laugh and giggle and carry on in the same sort of conversation with people of the alt right after these events. That inhibits me. It changes the type of conversation, the type of show that I can do. And so it wasn't just social media's speech restrictions. I was changed. I was affected by all these horrible right-wing atrocities. It makes it a lot more difficult to laugh at the alt-right when members of that movement go out and do heinous things.
Was it because it made it more real? Was it like funny because you thought it was like they were kind of like just like funny banter and you thought it was a joke, and then those atrocities happen and then you're like, oh, this is real?
That's a little broad. So I always knew that underneath the banter that the alt-right was fundamentally an anti-Jewish white nationalist movement. So
No,
I understand.
that doesn't sound like them. That's not the white nationalists I know.
Yeah. So I always understood that, but there's not like an inherent connection between an ideology and behavior. So, for example, you could read the Bible and think that the Egyptians were the most, evil people ever. Or in Judaism, we have a teaching about Amalek. Remember Amalek, these are really awful people who were not just in the Torah, but from a Jewish perspective, Amalek is this incredibly flexible term that you can then apply to any group that you don't like. And you can call, the Palestinians, oh, these are Amalek. So that just because a group holds beliefs that are threatening to your group or threatening to what you want to see in the world doesn't mean that they're necessarily a threat. So there's no inherent connection between the beliefs, because you can read the Bible and you could take all sorts of heinous perspectives on homosexuals and other groups, and you could find support for that in the Bible. But most Americans who believe in the Bible, who are Christians or Jews, don't want to put into practice Torah teachings about homosexuality. They're no threat to causing any physical or even emotional harm to homosexuals just because they believe in the Bible. But then sometimes the things that people say, members of their group start putting into action, and then we're just in a whole different place. And so I always, of course, knew it was possible that the alt-right or the alt-left could spin out of control into violence. But just like Antifa, okay, Antifa, with maybe one or two exceptions, has never directly killed anyone. Like Antifa, this anti-fascist movement, has been in a lot of brawls, but they're not going out killing people. And so the conversation that we have about Antifa and the type of shows that you could do with, say, members of Antifa, be very different if you're carrying on that conversation, the day after they go out and kill 28 people in a Walmart, right? That would completely change the sort of conversation that you'd have with Antifa. And the various alt-right atrocities since 2017 have just got to change for me, and I think for almost any normal person, the type of conversation you have with the alt-right.
David Smith says, why are Nazis seen as bad while denazification destroyed the West, not Germans?
Well, it's largely a matter of perspective. You've got to have some sort of moral code. So if you are at war with the Nazis in World War II, then the normal thing is that you are going to hate the Nazis, right? I mean, England, Australia, the United States were all at war with Germany, and it was a horrific war that cost tens of millions of lives, and it's become indelible in the Western consciousness that the Nazis are the epitome of evil. It's not the same perspective in Indonesia or in Africa or in India or in Japan or in China. For people in other parts of the world outside of first world Western industrialized nations, the Nazis are just a group who lost a world war. But for people in the West, then we have experienced life with Nazis as the epitome of evil. So it has a great deal to do with the situation. Now, if I'm having this conversation with someone who shares the same moral code as I do, Orthodox Judaism, then yeah, we can point to texts within the Jewish tradition, and we can make a logical, rational case for why the Nazis are really evil. But any moral judgment has to begin with a perspective. So the perspective of people in the West, generally speaking, is Nazis are evil, and that's never going to change because of the horror of World War II. But the perspective of people outside the West towards, Adolf Hitler and Germany in World War II and the Nazis, et cetera, is different. They're just a group who lost a war. So the morality of people in Japan and the morality of people in China and the morality of people in Indonesia is going to start from a perspective of a different way of looking at things. But it's never going to change that Nazis are viewed as heinous in the United States or Australia or England. It would be weird to think that would change.
Laponia says, please ask him why he refuses to introduce me to Deborah Lipstadt. Who's this?
So Deborah Lipstadt is an American Jewish professor who specializes in Holocaust denial. She wrote a book about the Holocaust denial movement, and she was played by a very attractive actress in the 2016 movie Denial, which was about her lawsuit with David Irving. So David Irving, you could call a Nazi apologist or just a provocateur, sued Deborah Lipstadt for libel because she called him a Holocaust denier. And so this was a famous court case in year 2000 that Deborah Lipstadt won resoundingly and was turned into. I enjoyed the 2016 movie Denial, but it is interesting in that 2016 movie Denial, David Irving is actually a good-looking man, but he's played by this really creepy actor, while the heroic lawyer in the movie is played by a really good-looking actor who looks quite like David Irving in real life. So they also cast someone as Deborah Lipstadt who looks absolutely nothing like Deborah Lipstadt. So it's certainly emotionally manipulative.
So they said, Elliot Blatt said, ask Luke about his views on secular coronism.
Oh God, so people, like in the type of online conversations that I have, people are looking for a solution for a steadily decaying and fraying West, where we've got steadily reduced, every month it seems we're getting lower and lower as far as social cohesion and social trust. And so Claire Corr, this secular woman in England who is of Asian ancestry, and she is not a Muslim, but she sees like a secular approach to the Quran as the basis for building a cohesive society. And so in my little corner of the internet, we have some amazing characters. And Claire Core is one amazing character, and Northern Hobbs is another amazing character.
Let's see here. What did Norvin just say? David. God, I'm starting to get them confused. That's good. David, oy vey. Time to book Claire Caw. She has not reached the politically provoked chat. Who's Claire Caw?
So Claire Core is that woman I mentioned of Asian
right.
ancestry, lives in England, and thinks the secular approach to the Quran can provide a basis for building a cohesive and trustworthy and upstanding society.
Okay.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Do you think that? So you had mentioned the decay of social cohesion. Do you think that's something that could be reconciled in America?
I'd like to think so. I don't know how. It's very, very difficult because you have to have things in common. So, I mean, I don't know any of you guys, and you don't know me, aside from, the brief little bit of research that we've done. But let's say we got together and let's say we had a shared love of C.S. Lewis, a famous Christian author. So we could bond over that. Or let's say we got together and we had a shared love of the Alexander technique, or you need things in common. And society and individuals and communities are becoming increasingly fragmented, so that patent lawyers hang out with patent lawyers, and Orthodox Jews hang out with Orthodox Jews, and people in the entertainment industry primarily hang out with people in the entertainment industry, and people are increasingly living in silos, so that people choose to hang out with people who are most like them, racially, religiously, politically, culturally. And so it's a huge challenge trying to rebuild the American political, social, cultural fabric.
What are your thoughts on our immigration system?
I would like to really halt immigration because it's not helping the lack of cohesion and social trust. On the other hand, I'd be fine if we just took in geniuses. Like, you're an amazing inventor, you've got some amazing gifts, you've got an amazing amount of money. Okay, I'm willing to take you. But other than someone who can make amazing contributions to our society, then I'm quite skeptical about us needing more immigrants. We've got 330 million people. If, for example, you're concerned about global warming, which I'm not well informed about, so I don't have any position, but if you're concerned about the environment and global warming, you definitely don't want any more immigrants into the United States, because they're just going to use, a huge number of fossil fuels as they take on the American lifestyle. So if you've, driven down Interstate 80 or any, major American highway, and the number of cars that are on there, like, why would you want to have a longer commute? Like, let's say you've got a 5-mile commute in Los Angeles and it'll take you an hour. So why would you want more people in Los Angeles when you've got housing prices going up, when our infrastructure is bursting? And if we do have immigration, then we have to have something like an immigration safety board akin to the airline safety board. So every time that there's an airline crash, we investigate what the heck happened. And so we need an immigration safety board. So every time we bring in an immigrant who then hurts us badly, we need to hold people responsible for that decision. Like, why did we allow this person in? And that we would allow millions of people to come here illegally and live among us illegally. I just don't see how that's of benefit to American citizens. That just creates a two-tiered society. They have to live in the shadows, and they're wide open for exploitation. And if people can get this cheap labor by employing people who are here illegally, they're not going to hire your regular American who lives next door to you. Instead, they're going to try to hire a nanny for just $10 an hour.
Why do you think some people are drawn to the idea that, we call them Swedes over here just to be safe because we've got a lot of loose lip people. But why do you think that some people are so drawn to this idea that the Swedes are kind of controlling everything? And
everybody wants a magic key. So people, when they think about the world, they go crazy if they can't make the world cohere. Right. So just like we need a cohesive society where everything has its place, we need a worldview. We need some way of understanding the world that makes sense. And so you want to have a magic key. So instead of having to constantly revise your understanding of the world based on new information, Most people find that anxiety provoking and frustrating, and there's no basis then for feeling superior to anyone else. So if you can deduce a magic key that then unlocks how the world works, you get people are get particularly those who are already socially isolated are going to embrace that. So the people who think of Swedes as the key to unlocking how the world works, these are not, generally speaking, people with a thriving social life or a thriving career. These are people who are overwhelmingly socially isolated. The more socially isolated you get, the more desperate your need for creating meaning. The more desperate your need for creating meaning, the more desperately you are going to buy into some ridiculous conspiracy theory or superstition, because you so desperately need meaning because you don't have normal human connection. So this all builds on each other, because then once you start taking on these conspiratorial or superstitious beliefs, you become even more socially isolated. So the only people who hang out with you are people who believe that, Uncle did nothing wrong in World War II. And so it just builds and builds, and people's, lives, go down, go down, go down, go down. So the key to rehabilitating people and rehabilitating a society is rebuilding connection, because when people lose connection, that's when they become susceptible to a desperate need for meaning, which can lead to good things. They may take on some righteous cause, but it usually leads to taking on some crank cause, like denying various basic scientific facts, denying basic historical facts, believing that one small group is responsible for most of the ills in the world, because people have to have meaning. People have to have connection. People have to have meaning. If you have sufficient connection, you're not going to be driven crazy by a desperate need for meaning, because you've already got meaning in your friendships and in your family. But if you don't have connection, you got to have meaning, and your desperation for meaning is going to lead you to seize on things that explain the world that simply aren't true. They're just bogus, conspiratorial or superstitious beliefs. So I understand the appeal of cults and conspiracies, because I have struggled at times with just basic levels of human connection. As I mentioned, I've never been able to sustain a relationship for longer than a year.
Why do you think that is?
I think it probably goes back to my early childhood, when I lived in a lot of foster homes, and because my mother was dying of cancer, so I did not learn basic, human connection skills. And then to deal with the pain and the agony of always being shifted around these different homes, I started developing a very vivid fantasy life, and which initially started out by calming me, but then what started out as adaptive became maladaptive. So the more time I spent in this fantasy world where, I was the Prime Minister of Australia, I was, the general, I was, this world transforming figure, the more time I spent in this fantasy, which I used to deal with my lack of connection, the more fantasy I got into, then the less I was able to connect with other people. So these things started to spiral. And then, I'd get lost in a world of, fantasizing about sex, fantasizing about love, fantasizing about power, and then dealing with my.
Escapes for you?
I'm sorry?
Were these like escapes for you?
Yeah, it was an escape that became my happy place. Like I could go from feeling miserable to feeling happy just by slipping into fantasy mode. So who's not going to want to go from being miserable to happy, just, basically like that? And so I would slip into a fantasy mode where, to try to deal with my pain at my inability to normally connect with other people, I would create this fantasy conception of myself, this narcissistic version of myself that was completely removed from reality, which then greatly damaged my ability to have normal connections. So a lot of these things became negative spirals in my life. So I probably would not have done, all the blogging that I've done, or all the online activity that I have done, if I had the ability, a normal ability, to connect with people in real life.
It seems like most people learn relationships through their parents, like what a relationship's supposed to be. So if you have, an absent father, or if you have a single parent, you'll notice that they will end up struggling with their own relationships in life. People with, the nuclear family seem to be a lot more successful with relationships. And I don't know, it's interesting.
Right. I mean, I've noticed that too, but what's not clear is whether that's nature or nurture. So,
Mhm.
so for example, when I look at some of my ancestors, they're just as crazy as I was. Like you read some of the writings of some of my, ancient ancestors or some of their antics, and it's like, oh my God, that's 40. That's just like me. So people who are genetically predisposed to fractured relationships, obviously they're much more likely to end up single or divorced, and other people are genetically predisposed to connect and to bond, and so they're going to develop nuclear families. So it's not at all clear whether it's primarily the genetic factor or the bonding, cultural, environmental factor that makes people the way they are.
Do you are you at all a race realist?
Well, I see people as having different gifts. So I'm not with that crowd who's like could talk for 3 hours about how this certain group is just horrible and violent and stupid and idiotic and responsible for all that's evil in society. I'm not comfortable with that conversation, but I could have a conversation with people who appreciate hey, Swedes have certain qualities, and the French have certain qualities, and the Japanese have certain qualities, and Aborigines produce certain types of communities, and Indians produce certain types of communities, and Canadians produce certain types of communities. So I understand different peoples as having different gifts. So you could call that race realist, but the problem for me with much of the race realist crowd is that it's just often an excuse to be antisocial and nasty and hostile, and just denying the humanity of other groups, which I don't believe God makes mistakes. I don't deny the humanity of other groups.
Oswald Swinger says, does Luke think there's a correlation between the Dutch being among the most Swede-friendly Europeans and also being the European demographic least likely to wash their hands? What is he talking? What is this? What is he doing?
Okay, I'm not sure what he's saying there because I don't know anything about the Dutch and an inability to wash their hands. But I will tell you, there's this great Dutch psychologist who talks about cultural dimensions. His name's Geert Hofstede. I can't say it properly, but Geert Hofstede. That's how you'd say it in English. So he talks about 6 dimensions of national culture. And one example of this is how much do you fear strangers? And he gives, so some cultures, such as those in Central and Eastern Europe, have a very high fear of strangers, while Anglo-Saxon cultures tend to have comparatively low level of fear of strangers. Now, neither attitude is inherently superior. Obviously, one attitude will serve you better in certain circumstances, and other attitude will serve you better in different circumstances. But he gives this amazing story in his book about this Dutch girl who goes to live with an Austrian family. She's an exchange student in high school, and she loves her host family, and they get along great until once she hears the host family saying something negative about Swedes, and the girl says, "Well, I'm Swedish." And then from that point on, she has to eat her meals separately from her host family. It just completely fractures the host family. Now, this isn't because the host family is evil. It's just that in Austria and Germany and Eastern Europe, there's this much more intense fear of that which is different. That which is different is dangerous, is much more of a dominant, instinctive feeling in Central and Eastern European cultures, while for Western Europe, that which is different is much more likely to be regarded as interesting and provocative and useful. Hey, this is the opposite of boring. So different cultures have different cultural dimensions.
David Smith says, is Luke saying that his toxic nature made him want to convert? Is it because they match the toxic nature?
Now I know what he's saying. So look, anyone who converts to a new religion is going to be pretty high in the psychological quality of I'm even blanking. It's of neuroticism. So neuroticism means that you really enjoy dwelling in negative thoughts. So obviously it's not normal to convert to a new religion, and usually people only do something like that out of a lot of pain and disconnection and out of this desperate search for meaning. And so I was desperately searching for meaning like many people, and I found meaning in Orthodox Judaism. And I also there was a strong, probably psychological component of wanting to get rid of an unwanted self and to be quote unquote born again into this new way of living. And so I think a lot of people who come from, broken, traumatic childhoods, they want to get rid of that self and remake themselves as something completely new, and that never works out. But so I just took my neuroticism and my addictions with me into my own new way of living. But yeah, someone who converts to a new religion is usually going to be high in neuroticism. They're usually going to be trying to attain something in the conversion that's not really possible.
Okay. I think that's about all the questions I have. Do you guys have any other questions?
No,
no, I
I'm
don't.
good. No, yeah, I don't want to just bore him with the regular stuff. So, yeah, I'm good. I thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
You're
Maybe we
welcome.
can do something in the future.
Sounds great.
Yeah. You should definitely come join us some more. Yeah, if there's anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to address, though, go as yours.
No, I'm pretty talked out, so I appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity to come on your
Yeah,
show.
no, thank you so much for coming on. I thought it was really good. And yeah, I'm excited to watch some of your stuff that because I've been hearing a lot of good things. So yeah, we are going to call that a night then, you guys. We'll be back. I think we might have a debate coming on Thursday. I'm not sure. I'll have to check that out. But other than that, thank you guys for joining us, and we are